Okay, so welcome everybody to Variety and Focus Cabernet Sauvignon with me, Lydia Harrison MW. I'm a full-time educator at WSET school in London, and while the school is unable to be open due to the coronavirus, we thought we'd do some webinars to keep us entertained, to hopefully keep you entertained, to keep sharing our passion and knowledge of wine, spirits, sake. And so, yes, I am a big Cabernet Sauvignon fan. I know I said that last time when I did Chardonnay, but equally, I do love Cabernet Sauvignon. So that's what I'm going to look at tonight, the history of the grape, some of its key characteristics. I can't obviously look at every single Cabernet Sauvignon region or wine, unfortunately. I'm sorry, there's just not enough time. But I will take you through some of my favorites, and also importantly, 3 places that I've been to. I always think it's best, and you can talk sort of most passionately and you're most connected with the places that you visited. So that's why I chose the regions that I've been to, that I've had first-hand experience with, and also really enjoy their wine styles, importantly, and contrasting wine styles as well to discuss this evening. So sorry if your favourite Cabernet Sauvignon region or producer isn't mentioned, but I'll try and cover quite a lot and obviously touch on quite a few areas. Okay, let's go to the next slide. So just to start, obviously, with a little bit of background, in the picture there you have Chateau d'Issa, which is in Margaux. I took that myself on one of my many visits to Bordeaux, and I just think it looks spectacular and very inviting. So Cabernet Sauvignon, it was actually predated by Cabernet Franc in Bordeaux, which I think is interesting. A lot of people would think more about Cabernet Sauvignon from Bordeaux, but Cabernet Franc was actually more dominant there. And that's because actually Cabernet Franc is one of the parents of Cabernet Sauvignon, so that's not surprising in that respect. So it wasn't really till the end of the 18th century that Cabernet Sauvignon starts to gain favour in Bordeaux, and then obviously from its homeland in Bordeaux, it then begins to spread to New World regions, to rest of France, to lots of different countries. It's amazing how many countries are showing Cabernet Sauvignon. So I noted a few kind of important things. This isn't necessarily in chronological order. I don't know all the dates of when it was permitted in some of the other regions, but I put a few notable historical moments in there for the grape. You had the Judgment of Paris in 1976, this famous wine tasting that took place in Paris, where Stag's Leap wine cellars of California Napa Cabernet Sauvignon beat some famous other Cabernet Sauvignon wines, notably some of your first growth Bordeaux. So a really sort of monumental tasting held by Steven Spurrier with lots of, really credible wine judges, and it came out on top. And this, I think, really changed people's perceptions of New World wine producing regions, and that massively put Napa on the map, and that's why we're going to look at Napa a little bit later on. And it also just showed, it wasn't just Bordeaux that could do great Cabernet wines. And I completely agree. And I'm going to visit a couple of different New World regions tonight, but obviously there's so many other countries and places making top quality wines from this great variety or blends of it. So yeah, the 1980s, 1990s really sees plantings going wild throughout the New World, obviously in the States, South America, Australia, New Zealand. It's really far flung, but also throughout France and Europe, places in Spain, places in Italy that start to increase their plantings of this grape variety. And this is just a very small example of some of the the areas where it is now permitted that you wouldn't necessarily associate it with as the classical or traditional grape of the region. There's many more, but I just wanted to showcase a few. So for example, in Chianti, it is now permitted as a small part of the blend. Bulgari is the DOC that they created basically in Italy as a response to this Super Tuscan movement, where they started, going outside of the traditional grapes and using grapes other than Sangiovese and using grape varieties like Cabernet Sauvignon and making exceptional wines. So they had to then create these DOCs to accommodate wines from this variety. And then Ribera del Duero in Spain, again, only as a small part of the blend, but it is permitted. So it just highlights the fact that this grape variety has really gone global to lots of different countries and regions, some where it's dominant and really is the mainstay, and others where it provides a supporting role as well as a blending partner to some of the traditional grapes. And then you have the Berlin tasting. So this was basically Chile's equivalent to the Judgment of Paris. So again, some amazing wines being made in Chile, some top quality age-worthy examples that I will mention a little bit later. And the Berlin tasting put those on the map and sort of maybe perhaps didn't put them on a level par. People's perceptions take a while to change, but it really elevated the status of Chilean wines and demonstrated that, if the world's experts are tasting blind and think that, Senna and then Venedo Chadwick actually came out first, and Senna, both top wines of Erasmus, and Senna came out in second place in this judgment, again beating some of the first growths in Bordeaux like Chateau Margaux, etc. Then it really just shows that if the experts can get fooled by these amazing wines and put them best, not fooled, but they didn't know what they were, and rate them best in quality, then they really are up there with the best. So that really kind of put Chile on the map. And I'm going to talk about Chile later because I just went there on my first MW trip back in November and got to taste some of these incredible wines and see it firsthand. It was my first ever time to visit Chile, so I thought I have to mention it. There's also incredible plantings in China as well as a more recent development. I'm no expert on Chinese wines or plantings, but a lot of grape varieties have been planted there recently. Cabernet Sauvignon is one that's incredibly popular for consumption and also in the vineyards there as well. And I think we'll start to see more wines. There's one from LVMH called Aoyun. I'm probably not pronouncing that at all correctly. It's Aoyun, made from a blend of Cabernet Sauvignon and Cabernet Franc. So I just wanted to highlight, a few of the places and how widely spread this grape variety is. It is now the most widely planted black grape variety in the world for wine. Okay, with 341,000 hectares of the last look, it's the OFE figures for 2015. So this is now the most widely planted black grape. And it wasn't always, but it has now reached pole position. So we're going to have a look at some of those key regions for it. Okay. There's that lovely Chateau d'Issin as well. Doesn't it just make you want to go to Bordeaux? Right. Sometimes the computer's a little bit slow. So next up, hopefully you can see my slide on the characteristics of Cabernet Sauvignon. And as I mentioned earlier, it's actually the progeny of Cabernet Franc and Sauvignon Blanc. So these are the two parents, and they just naturally cross-fertilized in the vineyard, it's believed, in Bordeaux, where they were both planted, and created Cabernet Sauvignon. So Cabernet Sauvignon is their baby, though I like to think of it as perhaps the sort of child that grows taller than the parents, because if you think of Cabernet Sauvignon, you tend to think of it as bigger and sort of even more structured than Cabernet Franc. So you imagine that kind of child that's now taller than the mum and dad and sort of bigger and stockier, but it obviously also has similar flavors, and a lot of those herbaceous characteristics that you would attribute to Cabernet Franc and Sauvignon Blanc are found in Cabernet Sauvignon. So you can sort of see its lineage. It's a really small berry, and this picture here on the slide is Cabernet Sauvignon. Sometimes we just use random pictures of grapes, but I can assure you here that this picture is Cabernet Sauvignon. And you can see it's a really sort of tiny, compact little grape berry, and it's almost bluey in color. And it's thick-skinned, and this is good because it generally gives it good disease resistance. But also that thick skin is going to give a lot of colour and a lot of tannins to your wine. This is a highly phenolic grape variety. So it gives a lot of structure, a lot of backbone, color, tannins, and also acidity usually as well, depending on the climate and the level of acidity. It's late ripening. Okay, so when we think about those places, and everyone's mentioned loads of places where you're drinking Cabernet Sauvignon from this evening, they will have to have at least a sort of minimum amount of warmth in order to ripen this grape variety. Okay, there's nothing worse than when it's not quite ripe and it's going to taste a bit astringent. You've got all the acid and tannin, and you haven't got the kind of fruit ripeness to make the wine taste lovely and delicious. So it, you know, in France, it's the more southerly areas like Bordeaux. We go to California, sunshine is not an issue. You know, Australia, South Africa, these are warmer climate regions where Cabernet Sauvignon can really thrive. And you will pick it late. So it buds late and then it ripens late. So maybe well into sort of late September, October in Bordeaux, and usually a good couple of weeks harvesting after you've picked some of your other grape varieties like Merlot. Okay, so you need patience, but that's a good thing sometimes, that it ripens slowly. It gives you time to build up all the flavors and the aromatics as well in this grape. It's vigorous. So as we saw with Chardonnay, sometimes the most popular grape varieties are ones that will grow well. Okay, as a grape grower, you need to sort of make your life a little bit easier. So obviously the best quality wines will try and restrict that vigor, therefore have a smaller plant that puts the energy into ripening the grapes and giving you better quality fruit. But that's another reason why it's so widely spread, is that you can also, at fairly high yields, still make wine that tastes of Cabernet Sauvignon. So just if you want to make an inexpensive Chilean or Southern French or cheap Bordeaux from Cabernet Sauvignon, it's going to give you sufficient volume as well. So it makes it economical. And even at those high yields, it will still taste like Cabernet. So what does Cabernet taste like? Blackcurrant. I think, you know, we definitely think of this lovely blackcurrant cassis aromatics that can be traced to specific compounds found in Cabernet Sauvignon. It's also herbaceous, and I think you see that in different ways depending where your Cabernet Sauvignon's from. It can stretch everything from more sort of blackcurrant leaf, tomato leaf, through bell pepper to sometimes kind of riper mint, menthol, eucalypt kind of characters, depending where it's grown or what stage it's picked. But there's always this lovely herbaceous streak to it as well. And because you've got this amazingly structured black grape, when you obviously restrict the yields, do the winemaking to give it lots of tannins, then it has a real affinity to oak aging as well. And that's what your top quality Cabernets will be aged in. The oak will obviously add all those lovely complexity, add lots of complexity to the flavors, those lovely characteristics of vanilla, cedar, toast, spice, etc. But it will also soften those tannins, and we know this can be a really high tannin grape, so it gives those tannins a chance to polymerize and soften, so they feel more pleasant on the palate, even if there's still mouth coating. Even they can still be a high level but have a lovely sort of refined texture from longer aging, and obviously the lovely flavors that oak aging will add as well. And then ageability. So I was very fortunate recently, I haven't got a glass of it this evening, it's only Tuesday, but to try a bottle of this, which is Domaine de Chevalier 1989. Equally, when I was just looking at my notes from Chile today, we tasted some 89 of Senna while we were there, and of Don Melchor, another Chilean producer, top Cabernet, going back to the 80s, 90s. So this wine ages incredibly well, and even with that sort of 30 plus years aging, they can have freshness, they still have some primary fruit characters, they still have incredible structure, as well as all the delicious flavors that you get from that bottle aging, and that sort of leather, tobacco, forest floor, cigar box, all those sort of lovely tertiary characters that we talk about as well. Sorry, I've just realized I unplugged my laptop, and I do not want this to die, so I'm just plugging that back in. Sorry about that. Finally, the last characteristic is it expresses terroir and vintage variations. So I'm digging a bit of my hole for myself here, because everyone's then going to say, how can you taste the difference between different areas? And I think as those tastings that we talked about at the beginning show, if, you know, the best of the world's wine critics can think that Chilean wine is a Bordeaux or vice versa, then I don't think I'm going to be able to give you the answers that you need. But I think you can generalize, and certain wines do really show their place. And I mean terroir is all encompassing here. So it will express the vineyard, but also the picking time, the winemaking, everything that the winemaker does to it, as well as the climate and the vineyard and the soil and the aspect, etc. And vintage variation as well. So one of the reasons why I love Bordeaux is you can get different styles from the same commune year after year, depending on the conditions of that vintage. So it adapts and it really shows different styles as well. Right, let's move on. And the next one is just to mention, perhaps not quite as stylistic diversity as Chardonnay that I was talking about a couple of weeks back. But again, you still can have diversity. And this is why, you know, lots of people enjoy Cabernet at different price points in different ways. You can have it as a rosé. Okay, if we think about Cabernet d'Anjou is an appellation for rosé made from Cabernet grapes, Cabernet Sauvignon and Cabernet Franc in the Loire. Okay, equally, New World, lots of places can use it for rosé, and it does tend to give you a little bit more of a structured rosé. Sometimes they can have a little bit of phenolics, a little bit more colour, but those lovely kind of fruit flavours. You can have really easy drinking reds. As we said, you can make it higher yields in a warm place where you can easily ripen all your grapes. You can just have high yields of Cabernet. You can do less sort of winemaking techniques, so you don't want to extract as much structure. You can just sort of do minimal pumping over, maybe even some micro-oxygenation, which is where they pump little bubbles of oxygen through the wine to kind of soften the tannins and recreate the impact of barrel aging. So you can just have, you know, easy drinking reds, relatively straightforward to drink. Equally, you can have some of the most complex age-worthy styles and everything in between. So that's what I love about Cabernet. You can get a, you know, relatively inexpensive wine that will taste like Cabernet Sauvignon through the sort of mid to high price brackets, and then your really, really top wines that are incredibly complex, concentrated, and age-worthy. And as well, you can have different blends. So we're obviously going to look at Bordeaux and Clarets, which I just saw pop up in the chat. So yeah, very typically blended with Merlot in Bordeaux, but also Cabernet Franc, Petit Verdot, some of the other grapes in the region. Equally, you can find other blends. Cabernet Shiraz is popular in Australia. Cabernet Malbec in Argentina, okay, with Sangiovese in Italy. There's so many. So you can find it as a blending partner, and they will obviously can taste different depending on the other ingredients in your wine, in your recipe. Equally, you can get 100% Cabernet Sauvignon as well. So diversity of styles, and we will look at some of those shortly. So first off, we always had to start in France. We don't have to, but I love Bordeaux, and I feel you have to start here with Cabernet because this is its home. This is, you know, its birthplace, where it started. And as you can see here on map of Bordeaux, we're southwest France, so down in the city of Bordeaux. It's a moderate maritime climate, and that's so important for Cabernet. It needs some warmth, so it won't ripen really very well in cool climates. And the impact of the Atlantic and that maritime, so moderating influence, gives it that long growing season. It needs that time to ripen. So the fact that it has milder autumns and often a nice, what we call an Indian summer, a lovely mild, warm autumn that just helps that Cabernet ripen, and that sometimes can really save the vintage in some of the years where you've had kind of lots of rain and not great conditions during the growing season. If you get a dry spell in kind of September, October, some nice warm temperatures, that can just finish off your ripening and sort of save your harvest. And you can find Cabernet Sauvignon throughout Bordeaux, obviously on the right bank as well. There are little patches in Saint-Emilion, for example, of gravel, and Chateau Figeac, for example, is a Saint-Emilion producer that actually has an unusually high proportion of Cabernet. But the real home place for Cabernet Sauvignon, and where it dominates the blend, and therefore my favorite wines, are the left bank. So all the purple vineyards you can see there on the left, the Medoc, the communes within it of Saint-Estèphe, Pauillac, Haut-Medoc and Saint-Julien. Some of those really famous names for Bordeaux reds, where, as I say, Cabernet is usually the dominant partner in the blend. And just, yeah, I love the styles. Equally down in Pessac-Léognan as well, in the northern part of the Graves, making wines. And that is because of the soil. Okay, we said it's late ripening, so Cabernet really needs this heat retaining gravel. It's going to drain well, and that's really important because it rains a lot in Bordeaux. So if you're in a maritime climate and you get a lot of rain, you need that to drain quickly. And then the gravel heats up and acts like a little oven. So it's going to help ripen the Cabernet Sauvignon, provide that extra bit of warmth that it needs to ripen. So that's why it does so well in these areas. They will still blend, obviously. Blending can be a great thing. You can, one of the things that's often, not a criticism perhaps, but where Cabernet maybe is a little bit lacking, is the body, the kind of mouthfeel. It has all this structure and acid and tannin, but sometimes it can lack a little bit of flesh. So other great varieties fill that role, and Merlot is one particularly that helps. It gives a bit of body and alcohol. It's the kind of filling to your Cabernet Sauvignon. So that's a very typical blending partner. And equally, that can add different flavors and you get complexity from your different blending components. Equally, you could talk about appellation differences if you really want to get into the nitty-gritty of Cabernet styles from Bordeaux. It does tend to be more dominant in places like Pauillac, Saint-Julien. Margaux, it really depends. It's a very large, it's the largest of the 4 communes, and there's a lot more Merlot, and there's some areas are more clay-based where Merlot and some producers will maybe do 50-50. Others like Chateau Margaux that has a lot of gravel and a high proportion, so quite varied in style. And Saint-Estèphe, again, because it's more northerly, a little bit cooler, has a bit more Merlot in some of the blends as a general rule. Okay, obviously there's lots of different Chateaux, lots of different producers, all with their own makeup. But just going down between them, Saint-Estèphe, obviously known as the most tannic and kind of structured. Pauillac has that lovely kind of graphite, again with those pretty muscular tannins. Saint-Julien is going to be one of my favorites. For me, it sits between that kind of structure of Pauillac, but also some of that softness that you get in Margaux. And then Margaux of the southerly ones, a little bit more kind of floral and fragrant, but all can make amazing Cabernet Sauvignon dominant blends. And I think with Bordeaux, you know, it's so hard to generalize because there's so many different producers, and I think it really depends. There's so many different points at where you can do different things with your Cabernet Sauvignon. So if you're doing different things in the vineyard, depending on your canopy management, you know, how much sunlight you give the grapes, how much shade, what time you pick, what yield, the age of your vines. Older vines are going to give you less and more concentrated fruits. You know, that's just some of the decisions in the vineyard. And then you have all your winemaking choices. You know, what temperature will you ferment at? And warmer temperatures are going to extract more color and tannin. Okay. What type of oak? Obviously in Bordeaux it's French, but what kind of toast? How long? What size? All these sort of decisions. What kind of extraction regime will you do, which is when you mix the skins with the juice to get all the color and tannin. So even within Bordeaux, the wines can taste different from chateau to chateau as a reflection on all of these decisions. But I think as a commonality with Bordeaux reds, you definitely get that lovely aromatic fragrant blackcurrant in a kind of classic Bordeaux vintage. Okay, so sort of normal temperatures, not hotter than usual, not miserable. I think you really get that kind of green bell pepper, capsicum character that's so signature to Cabernet Sauvignon, and especially in a moderate climate rather than a warm climate, you tend to get that more. I think it shines through more with this really fresh currant character. Then obviously the impact of the French oak, so that lovely kind of cedar, toast, clove, spice. And then with your real bottle-aged examples, those tertiary characters that for me, when I smell, just say, hi, you know, I'm a Bordeaux. Things like cigar, tobacco, pencil shavings, graphite, some of those sorts of characters. All right, and then lastly, obviously, just to mention, obviously in Bordeaux you have some ratings. So your top wines from the Medoc region, so any of those purple areas highlighted there on the map. If it's from some of the best chateaux, you can see the term Cru Classé on the label as of the 1855 classification. These chateaux, these producers were marked out as the best. So it's like the Premier League, I always say, in football. You know, your club is one of the top in the country and you are part of that. So it's like an exclusive club for these chateaux. And there's 5 ranks within it. So I've already mentioned tonight the first growths, like Chateau Margaux, Chateau Lafite, Chateau Mouton Rothschild. But there's lots of others as well. And then below that, so if you didn't quite make it into the Premiership, if you were like Championship level, as that's an English football reference, so apologies for any people that don't get that. But it's like the second tier, Cru Bourgeois. So for some of those producers that didn't quite make it, but are still really making good quality wines, and there's some often really good value to look for. So if you like Cabernet Sauvignon based Bordeaux blends, and you don't want to spend Cru Classé prices, then look out for Cru Bourgeois on the label. It's a term that only applies to the Medoc, so Cabernet here will always be a significant part of the blend, and you can often get really good value for money as well. And then down in the Graves as well, they still also have the Cru Classé. A little bit different though, just there's no hierarchy within it. You're either in or you're out. And the interesting thing there is they also have it for white wines. But we're not going to spend any time on that. We're just looking at Cabernet Sauvignon this evening. All right, so that is Bordeaux, and I've got a few pictures here to show you. Someone's just asked, what do I think of the Cru Bourgeois classification being done each year? It's a tough question. I don't think there's a perfect system in Bordeaux. So the 1855 classification is obviously long-standing. It has not changed really since 1855. Cru Bourgeois is just going to, it's actually just changed as of 2020. They're going to review it every 5 years. So it's a little bit more democratic, and it does give those chateaux that perhaps have been doing well, chance to get into the classification, and they are also going to give it 3 different tiers. But as with anything, there's no system is perfect, and with the ones that change yearly, I think it can breed some confusion within consumers. They don't necessarily know what all these different labeling terms mean. And equally, as you've seen in Saint-Emilion, where there's a system where people can get promoted and relegated, that can obviously cause a lot of issues with people that are unhappy if they get relegated. So, sometimes a static system, at least as an investment, that's not going to change. There's pros and cons to both systems. Right, let me just show you a few of my pictures. So this here, I think, shows Bordeaux. It's really flat, okay? This is not like some of those steep slopes that we always talk about. So you can see it's a really stretching vineyard. This is Chateau Smith-Haute Lafite down in Pessac-Lyonnais. And you can see the gravel soil there as well, these lovely kind of white stony outcrops, which obviously retaining the heat and ripening your Cabernet Sauvignon. And you can also see how closely the vines are planted together. Because here, obviously, there is a lot of rain, and some years it could be a little bit cloudy, it could be a little bit wet. You plant the vines quite close together so that they compete for nutrients in the soil. Obviously, there's plenty of water, and that will restrict the vigor as well if they're in competition with each other. So you've got a lot of what we call high density planting, lots of vines within a smaller space. And that way you will restrict the yield. The vine will produce less, which will give you better quality fruit. And that's really important in Bordeaux because you haven't got these, natural slopes. So the well-drained soil is crucial, and the fact that you've got this high density as well. And then the other picture here, very exclusive. I was in the cellar of Chateau Mouton Rothschild, and you can see these lovely, immaculate barrels. This is your 225 litre barrique, which is what they traditionally use in Bordeaux. That looks pretty new. You can tell there's hardly any staining of the red wine around the bung either. So, and the top wines can spend up to 2 years aging in these barrels, really softening the tannins and taking on all that flavor complexity as well. And then just to mention, obviously there's a few great vintages there of that we saw in the sort of museum cellar of Chateau Smith au Lafitte. I might be one of those vintages pictured, I might not. I'm not going to give that away. But the other thing for me is, yeah, the ageability of Cabernet. Just, I love it. I love it when it's mature. I love the fact the tannins soften out, but you still have this backbone and structure. You get this amazing sort of still dried fruits, but still even a little bit of black fruit, and still this kind of leafy character coming through. The herbaceous notes seem to mellow a little bit and intertwine with all the secondary oak characters and all the sort of leather tobacco tertiary as well. And I just find them amazing. Someone said, where is 1984? Shocking year, terrible vintage. So maybe they didn't produce very much, and maybe they didn't think it worthy of going in their library collection. So yes, unfortunately 1984 was not a very good year in a lot of regions throughout the world. Okay, right. I'm going to move on. I got told off doing Chardonnay for spending too long in Chablis, so I'm moving to the New World, so no one can say I have any preferences. And this is just to show you whereabouts we're talking about. Obviously, there's lots of different wine produced in California, and Cabernet Sauvignon also, you know, in Washington State, some great wines from up there. But I'm going to hone in on the Napa Valley, which you can see, just to kind of show you where it is on the second map. You can see it here north of San Francisco, coming off the bay, and it literally is a valley going upwards between two mountain ranges north of San Francisco. So you can, just to sort of show you whereabouts it's located, fairly coastal, but obviously in terms of latitude here, 40 degrees, 30 degrees in between, a warmer, more sort of southerly location than Bordeaux. All right. And here I am, just to prove I did go there. I visited something by the Napa Valley Vintners, to a program called Napa Rocks, where they take MW and MS students out to Napa to teach them about the region. And we had a fabulous week, me and a couple of my colleagues. That's us with the famous Napa Valley region sign. And it actually doesn't look very Mediterranean climate then, a little bit cloudy, but obviously normally you get some lovely sunshine during the day. And this is different to Bordeaux, okay? It's warmer, okay, during the day, sort of warmer average temperatures, and it's Mediterranean climate. So that means there's not much rainfall during the growing season. Most of that will happen in the winter. And so it's very easy to ripen Cabernet Sauvignon here. Lots of sunshine, drier conditions, perfect for our thick-skinned, you know, later ripening grape that loves the warmth. But what is important in California, and because what prevents it from getting too hot here, and why, you know, this region, Napa, is a real premium region for Cabernet Sauvignon, is the fog. And we've got to witness this firsthand, and it's really, really crucial. And basically, obviously, the hot air will rise during the day, and that will suck in cool air off the bay, from San Pablo Bay in the south. And that creates a kind of fog and mist. And that can come in sort of late afternoon or in the evening. And it can stay there, or it can come in the morning as well, and stay there until it burns off later in the morning. And this provides a real sort of nice cooling influence. So actually here, it's a bit different to where we look at other regions. The valley floor here will have a higher diurnal range than the vineyards on the hillsides, because this fog will be drawn in and will sit on the lower sides. Now that's something different to usual, where we say if the higher up you go, the temperatures will flux more. So here, that's why you can still make really top quality wines from these flat, valley floor sites, because that fog is really important at preventing the temperatures from getting too hot. So it gives some respite to the vines. It will cool down at night. They stop ripening. It preserves the acidity. But obviously, it's going to get lovely and warm during the day. And with California and Napa Cab, we think about ripeness. We think about this sort of sometimes sort of riper blackberry fruit, really lovely polished tannins here. So yeah, it's not really a struggle to ripen grapes here usually. We've got all different types of soil. They did a whole seminar. You've got so many different types, because you have soils that have come up from under the sea. You've got volcanic, and there's so many. I'm not a soil expert. It's not the element of wine I find the most interesting, I must admit. But you've got lots of different soils, from the benchlands through to the valley floor, which tends to be more sort of alluvial, and then you've obviously got the poor sort of mountain sites as well. So lots of different soil types throughout Napa Valley. You do tend to have to irrigate here, because, as I said, it's very dry. So they usually you will need to irrigate the vines. And then Napa Valley is obviously one AVA, and you could just see on a label Napa, but also there are 16 sub-AVAs, what they call nested AVAs, within the region. And they do something that I think is really clever here, is they use what we call conjunctive labeling. So if you were in Oakville, for example, which is one of the key sub-regions, you can put Oakville on your label to distinguish you from another region like Coombsville. But you also have to put Napa Valley. And I think that's so useful for the consumer. You don't have to know all 16. I can't remember all 16. But if it says one of the smaller areas, it then still tells you Napa. So you know whereabouts in the world you are. Okay. It's the valley. So as I said, it is actually a valley. It's 30 miles long, 5 miles wide. So not huge. This is only a small proportion of California's wine. I've put there, it's only 4%. So this is premium, vineyard region that's very highly protected as well. Obviously, they had to put in place some protections so that there wasn't just sort of urban sprawl and development from San Francisco. And equally, there's a lot of protection on the forest and woodland areas as well. So we're literally at kind of almost full planting capacity of Napa, which is great in terms of protecting the region, but it also then puts pressure on the grape prices and on the wine prices. So they are these, premium priced wines because you can't develop the area anymore. And just to highlight there, it's really a small proportion of California wine as a whole. But there's lots of different styles, and I'll show that more on the next map. So I talked about the valley, and you can sort of see it here with the relief map. Okay, you can see the lighter color here is flat as you go following the river, kind of flat river valley inland, and then you can see you've got the Mayacamas and the Vaca Mountains on either side, so protecting it from the really cool influence of the Pacific, so it is warm enough to ripen Cabernet, but equally protecting it from too much heat from inland as well. So you've got this perfect little valley to ripen your Cabernet Sauvignon. And you can see that in my picture here as well, and I'm standing on the eastern side here in Oakville, and I'm looking across the valley, so you can really see there's the flat valley floor, you've got the incline, I'm going up on the eastern side, you've got the mountains on the west as well, and it literally will run through there for 30 miles. And this does give you diversity. And one of the favorite tastings of my trip to Napa, on the first day we sat down in Beringer, and they just showed us some different Cabernets from some of their different vineyards, and they were incredibly different, and then showed us how, the blends that they make with those, and we did some others from different producers from all of the different AVAs, and it was amazing how incredibly different the wines tasted. And I think, a lot of people think all Napa Cab is rich and ripe, and that can be the sort of general style, and it's obviously riper than Bordeaux. but you've got such variation. And if you look here on this map, and this map doesn't feature all 16, there's a few more AVAs, Coombsville down here, south of Stag's Leap, and one called, oh, I've forgotten the name of it, something horse. there's a few more. But they're really going to differ. So obviously the vineyards on the flat valley floor is where it's going to be the sort of warmest. Wild Horse Valley, thank you, I knew I'd forget it. I always think of Dancing Horse for some reason. So the flat valley floor is very warm, get a lot of fog in the evening, which is great, but you're going to get these lovely sort of full-bodied plush ripe styles usually from here, especially some Rutherford, Oakville in the center of the valley. And this was the regions planted in the beginning, the sort of first areas developed in Napa. Equally, if you go up to Calistoga, this is furthest away from the base, so some of the hottest areas here, and giving you that ripeness. But equally, if you go up into the mountains, so you've got Spring Mountain District here, there's one Diamond Mountain as well, Mount Vida. This elevation is really going to bring down your temperatures. You actually get less swing in temperatures from the valley floor, but you've got this elevation, so you tend to get a little bit more tannin structure and acidity, maybe even a bit more kind of floral character in your Cabernet Sauvignon here. A little bit, yeah, sort of a more strained style sometimes. Equally, you can go up the mountains on the other side as well. But then the other key thing is your exposure. Okay, so remember the sun's going to be coming up from the east and then going over and setting in the west. So the vineyards here in Mount Vida and St. Helena get the kind of lovely gentle morning sun, and then the sun's going to go down behind the Mayacamas range and you're going to have some shade. So they tend to again have less sunshine, a little bit less sort of heat, and can be fresher styles, whereas those vineyards that are perhaps sitting here on the eastern side and therefore getting that hot afternoon sun, they again are going to really get some flavor ripeness. And that's exactly where I was standing, and I've got another couple of pictures to show you. I'm in Tierra Roja vineyards here. It's only a small producer in Oakville, and you can see I'm looking down the slope, which is westward facing, so across the mountains. At the end of that picture there would go out towards the Pacific, and they really would get a lot of sunshine and warmth in the afternoon on those slopes. And you can see the gradient here as well. So, and you can see sort of slightly clay soils here, sort of red, and then going down to the valley floor. So even within Napa, there's such diversity, and there's so many different styles being made. I think you just have to experiment and try different producers as well. Okay, I shall look at the questions at the end. I'm conscious of time. And lastly then, as I said, I have to look at Chile. I'm sorry if I was tempted to look at Coonawarra. I've also been there. I haven't been to South Africa, but some amazing Cabernets from there. So many places, Argentina, other parts of the States, you know, Australia, Margaret River, there's so many. Tuscany, I was really wanted to go there, but having just been to Chile, I had to give it recognition, and also because I think sometimes people don't give Chile all the credit it deserves. There are some top quality wines coming from this country. Yes, there's some cheap and cheerful wines as well, but that's just like everywhere. You can find inexpensive Bordeaux or French Pays d'Oc. There's very basic Australian wines, you know, so. And the top wines here, I think, have to give credit. And I was so impressed when I visited with some of the wines. Obviously, there are other great varieties, but Cabernet Sauvignon here is really dominant as well. It's, you know, it's king in Chile vineyards, and so I had to mention it. Again, also warm Mediterranean climate, so not that different to California and Napa, where we've just been looking at, and a country that's phylloxera free. So basically phylloxera was a vine pest that really devastated European vineyards, but it never got to Chile because Chile is protected. You've got the Pacific Ocean on one side, you've got the Andes on the other, you've got desert in the north, and, you know, Antarctic in the south. So it's never got there. So there are some incredibly old vineyards. You've also makes it very easy to be organic or sustainable. You've got, you know, really dry conditions, lots of sunshine. It really is perfect conditions for growing grapes. So it's very easy to grow grapes here. The flip side of that, unfortunately, is drought. And the last few years, there have been some, you know, really dry years. There have been drought the last couple of years in Chile, and you could see it in the vineyard regions. I was quite struck compared to Bordeaux, which is very plush and green because it rains all the time, like the UK, that, you know, it did look quite dusty and quite dry in a lot of places. So hopefully that doesn't become too much of an ongoing issue here, but obviously climate change and extremes, it is something to consider. And basically all of Chile is like a valley. So that's why all the vineyard regions here are named after valleys, you know, Aconcagua Valley, the Central Valley, made up of numerous other valleys. And it's literally because you've got this tiny, long, thin country. And you do have a small coastal ranges of mountains, and then obviously you've got the huge Andes on the other side, and a lot of the vineyards sit between that. So you imagine this stretch of coloured vineyards here as a valley, and then you have those more on the coastal side that are going to be cooler. Those in the middle, the Entre de Cordilleras, excuse my terrible Spanish, where it's warmer generally and tends to be a bit flatter, and then those going up into the foothills of the Andes. But obviously within that one big sort of valley, you've also got little cross valleys. So there's so many different undulations, different aspects and terrains, and just incredible vineyards. And Cabernet can show itself differently between vineyards to vineyards within the same sub-region. You can plant different grape varieties and blend that in, you know, really does depend. I don't have figures for all the regions, unfortunately. That was what Wines of Chile gave me at the time, but you can see it's not so widely spread in Aconcagua, even though it's still the most dominant grape variety there, especially in those more sort of central regions, further away from the coast. But in Maipo, look, nearly 7,000 hectares of Cabernet Sauvignon. And that is where a lot of the traditional plantings were, because it's around Santiago, the capital. And there's some incredible older vines of Cabernet Sauvignon there doing amazing, making amazing wines. And that's where Don Melchor is based. So that's Concha Toro's top sort of icon wine. They also make Almaviva. Maipo is also home. So I just need to move the chat so I can see what I wrote, of Senna and Don Maximiano. No, sorry, Venedo Chadwick. Don Maximiano is actually a little bit further south no, sorry, I've got it wrong. I keep confusing myself now. Don Maximiano is up in Aconcagua, as is Senna, and Venedo Chadwick is in Maipo. Sorry, I was going down. And then you have other incredible wineries as well. So places like Vic, which are doing a more recent but making amazing Cabernet and blends in Cachapual. San Pedro Cabo de Hornas is in one of their top Cabernet wines as well, also from Cachapual. And then Montes, who are based in Colchagua Valley. And Alpha M is one of their top wines. And, you know, I haven't highlighted particular producers in Bordeaux or Napa. I think there's so many, there's lots of big names. I'm sure you know some. But I just really wanted to point out some of the wines that I tasted in Chile when I was there and just thought were incredible and worthy and, you know, on the same stage as, you know, our top Bordeaux and Napa wines that probably have, you know, more acclaim or more people talking about them. And yeah, you just have this brilliant climate. They're very sort of focused on the environment there, really sort of lots of expertise going into it, and just incredible wines. And just to point out that they were just as age-worthy. As I said, I was fortunate to do some great tastings of 1980s onwards, Cabernet Sauvignon based wines from Chile, and just remarkable. I think as a signature, Chile Cab often has a, you know, really quite pungent herbaceousness, sometimes sort of green bell pepper, sometimes almost like a slight kind of green olive note to it as well, which is very fragrant. But these wines, as you say, you know, they were on a par with your top age-worthy wines from elsewhere. And again, often blended. You can see other sort of things in the blend, or just 100% Cabernet as well. Though I think I didn't quite mention, in Napa, 100% Cabernet is more typical perhaps in some of your Napa wines, because you've got that warmth and ripeness, and you can get 100% Cabernet because it's so prized there. But in all of these places, you do get some blends as well. And I think sometimes that just adds another level, another layer, which I really, really enjoy. Okay, I think I almost spoke for an hour on Cabernet Sauvignon. I think I've covered everything I wanted to say. Oh, this is the vineyard. So this is Vinha Erasures. This is their Don Maximiano winery in Aconcagua in the north. And I just wanted to showcase it because it's beautiful. You can see the really modern winery here, and I'm standing where the traditional winery is, but you can also see how green it is where they've irrigated, and then how dry it is on the other slopes that obviously have not been, or perhaps in the rain shadows. So you could really see the difference when you're touring around from the dry areas to where obviously irrigation is vital. And yeah, I thank you. I think that's a stunning photo, and it just takes me back to standing there having just tried some Senna and some Veneto Chadwick and amazing wines and the glorious sunshine. It was stunning. So I shall just move on to the final slide that just kind of sums up for me, why I think Cabernet Sauvignon is great. You still have recognizable characteristics from lots of different places, even in sort of everyday wines. It does show a sense of place. It gives you really structured reds, something you can really kind of chew and taste. The best examples are so complex. And the long-term ageability, they're still alive and kicking 30, 40, 50 years on for the best examples. But there's something for everyone at different price point, different styles, different quality levels, young to really mature. So that's why I wanted to talk about it. Just to sum up, obviously, please pop any questions in the chat shortly, and I will go through any, and Lauren can let me know any I've missed. I know it's been very chatty while I've been talking. Just to highlight a few of the other tastings we've got coming up. So whiskey tomorrow, the quiz, you've got sherry with Lauren next week, and then myself and Patrick McGuigan, who's a cheese writer, are doing some cheese and wine. And just to highlight as well, as I said, the video, so if you missed this, or you missed the beginning, or you missed the end, go to wsetschool.com, look under student information, and you can see all the recordings of the webinar there. It will go live. Give us a chance, I'll get it up ASAP. You've also got my Instagram there as well. Thank you to all those that attended. I shall take any questions if you have any now. I'm happy to answer those for you. But thanks for joining. Hope you enjoyed a good glass of Cabernet Sauvignon. Oh, I did show you this, but just to say, yes, this was one that I tasted. Incredible. Still so perfumed, still this lovely sort of blackcurrant leaf, bell pepper notes, but incredibly harmonious at 30 odd years of age. So I'm hoping I'm going to age, quite like a top Cabernet. Okay, I shall